The crisp autumn air of Boston, 1998, usually carried a certain invigorating promise, a sense of fresh starts and brisk efficiency. For Alex Thorne, however, it mostly heralded the lengthening shadows of a demanding work week and the ever-present chill that seeped into his bones, even inside his South Boston apartment. He was 26, a junior analyst at Lighthouse Marketing Solutions, a mid-sized firm nestled in a glass-and-steel tower overlooking the Charles River. His life was a symphony of routine. Wake before dawn, a quick, lukewarm shower, instant coffee brewed in a chipped mug, and the familiar rattle of the MBTA's red line inbound. Alex wasn't flashy. He wore department store suits, carefully pressed, and carried a worn leather briefcase that had seen better days. His lunch was invariably a turkey sandwich and an apple meticulously packed. This wasn't austerity by choice, it was necessity. His mother, living upstate in the quiet, rolling hills of Berkshire County, relied on him. A recent, unexpected medical diagnosis had added a crushing weight to his already tight budget, turning every paycheck from a means to an end into a lifeline. Lighthouse marketing was more than just a job. It was the engine that kept his mother afloat, the foundation of his quiet, fiercely private hope for a stable future. He excelled at his work, not with flamboyant presentations or charismatic pitches, but with a quiet, almost obsessive attention to detail. Give Alex a spreadsheet, a database, or a mountain of raw market research, and he would unearth patterns, inconsistencies, and insights that others overlooked. He understood the nuances of consumer behavior, the subtle shifts in demographic trends, the hidden stories within the numbers. His desk, tucked away in a quiet corner of the open-plan office, was always immaculately organized, a testament to his methodical mind. He was the silent engine, the one who refined the raw data into polished gems that the more vocal, front-facing members of the team would then present. One such vocal member was Mark Jensen. Mark was the quintessential golden boy of Lighthouse. 30 years old, with a confident smile that seemed permanently affixed and an easy, booming laugh, he exuded an effortless charm that captivated clients and colleagues alike. Mark was a Sagittarius, and he embodied every stereotype. Gregarious, adventurous, brutally honest in a way he considered charmingly blunt, but often came across as tactless. He was the star presenter, the one who could walk into a room and instantly command attention. He had a knack for taking Alex's meticulously compiled data, wrapping it in his own grand narratives, and delivering it with a flourish that made it seem entirely his own. Alex, being quiet and introverted, rarely challenged him. He preferred the silent satisfaction of knowing his work was good, even if the credit was often diffused. The office Christmas party, held annually at a swanky hotel ballroom in Back Bay, was usually an ordeal for Alex. He'd make his obligatory appearance, exchange a few polite pleasantries, nurse a single lukewarm drink, and then discreetly slip away. This year, however, felt different. He'd landed a major data analytics project for a prospective new client, Vertex Innovations, a fast-growing tech firm, and his findings were promising. He even allowed himself a flicker of optimism, a hope that perhaps this project would finally give him the recognition he needed to secure a raise, a small but crucial buffer against his mother's escalating medical bills. He arrived early, nursing a ginger ale, trying to blend into the periphery. Mark, already several drinks in, was holding court by the bar, surrounded by a laughing cluster of colleagues. Alex saw him glance over, their eyes meeting for a brief, unsettling second. Mark's smile seemed to widen, a predatory glint in his eyes that Alex dismissed as drunken mirth. Hours later, the party was in full swing. The music was loud, the room was hot, and the festive cheer had morphed into a boisterous cacophony. Alex was heading for the coat check, ready to make his escape, when he heard it, his name, amplified by Mark's voice, cutting through the din. "Ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention, please?" Mark bellowed, his voice carrying surprising authority despite its slurred edges. He was standing on a chair, a half-empty glass of champagne in one hand. A hush fell over the crowd, a mix of curiosity and anticipation. Mark loved the spotlight. "I just wanted to share a little something with you all," Mark continued, a wide, conspiratorial grin plastered on his face. "Something truly inspiring. You know Alex Thorne, our resident data wizard, right?" A few heads turned towards Alex, who froze mid-step, a knot forming in his stomach. He saw Mark holding a small, leather-bound notebook. It was his notebook. The one he kept tucked into the side pocket of his briefcase, the one where he jotted down his most private thoughts, his dreams, his personal budget, his anxieties about his mother, even the absurd fantasy of one day buying a tiny, run-down fishing shack on Cape Cod. A cold dread washed over Alex. His mind raced. How did Mark get it? He must have seen it when Alex momentarily left his briefcase open earlier during an office happy hour. Mark had a reputation for poking around. "Now, Alex is a quiet fellow," Mark announced, eyes twinkling with malicious glee. "But beneath that stoic exterior lies a soul of immense, let's say, frugality," laughter rippled through the crowd, "and a heart full of, shall we say, modest aspirations." Mark then proceeded to read, in a mocking, exaggerated tone, excerpts from Alex's notebook. He started with the detailed weekly budget entries, highlighting the extreme measures Alex took to save a few dollars. No fancy coffee, no eating out, only generic brand pasta. Each line was punctuated by Mark's exaggerated gasps and the increasing roars of laughter from the crowd. He then moved on to Alex's dream of the Cape Cod shack, twisting it into a pathetic pipe dream. He calls it the Lighthouse of Solitude. Folks, sounds like a sad, lonely little shack for a sad, lonely little man, doesn't it? But the true gut punch came when Mark read, in a saccharine, mocking voice, a passage about Alex's mother. "Every penny saved, every late night worked is for her, to give her comfort, to ease her pain. She deserves the world, and I will move mountains to give her even a sliver of it." Mark then looked up, feigning concern. "Oh, poor Alex. Is your mummy sick? Are you a charity case, working here to fund your family's tragic plight?" The laughter died down, replaced by an uncomfortable silence, then a smattering of awkward coughs. Some faces in the crowd showed genuine embarrassment for Alex, others just a perverse curiosity. Alex, meanwhile, felt the blood drain from his face, his ears roaring. His private sanctuary, his vulnerabilities, his deepest love and fears, all laid bare, ridiculed, and twisted into a grotesque joke. He felt exposed, naked, and utterly humiliated. His hands clenched into fists, trembling. His breath hitched in his throat. He couldn't meet anyone's gaze. He turned and stumbled towards the exit, the mocking echo of Mark's voice and the lingering whispers of the crowd searing into his memory. He didn't bother with his coat. The cold Boston air, usually sharp and refreshing, felt like a physical assault, mirroring the icy dread in his heart. He walked for what felt like miles, oblivious to the city lights, the bustling streets, the festive carolers. He just walked, the anger a hot, throbbing pulse behind his eyes, warring with the profound shame that threatened to drown him. The next few days were a blur of misery. He called in sick, feigning a virulent flu. He lay in his small apartment, the blinds drawn, replaying the scene over and over. The humiliation was a raw wound, festering with every memory. He felt a deep, debilitating sense of shame, not just for himself, but for his mother, whose struggle had been turned into entertainment. He wanted to quit, to disappear, to never show his face at Lighthouse marketing again. But the thought of his mother, of the medical bills, of the fragile future he was trying to build, pulled him back from the brink of despair. He couldn't afford to quit. He had to go back. But he wouldn't go back the same. On the fourth day, as the initial shock and shame began to subside, a cold, hard resolve began to crystallize within him. The despair hadn't vanished entirely, but it was now overshadowed by a relentless, burning desire for retribution. Mark had not just humiliated him, he had violated his privacy, ridiculed his deepest affections, and threatened his very means of survival. Alex realized, with chilling clarity, that Mark had made a fatal miscalculation. He had mistaken Alex's quiet nature for weakness, his introversion for incompetence, and his humble circumstances for a lack of resilience. Mark had seen him as a joke, but he never saw how far Alex would go for payback. Alex returned to work on Monday, outwardly composed. He avoided eye contact, buried himself in his projects, and answered only when directly addressed. He was a ghost in the office, but beneath that calm exterior, his mind was a furious tempest, calculating, planning. Mark, oblivious in his usual boisterous manner, offered a casual, almost dismissive apology. "Hey man, about the party, just a bit of fun, you know. No hard feelings, right?" Alex merely nodded, a noncommittal grunt. Mark, satisfied, moved on. He had no idea what he had ignited. Alex's revenge would not be loud or immediate. It would be a slow burn, meticulously planned, and devastatingly precise. He would leverage his greatest strength, his unparalleled analytical mind, and his quiet understanding of systems. He was the one who delved into the minutiae of the company's databases, the one who understood the hidden pathways of information. He knew where the skeletons were buried, both in the data and in the corporate culture. His first step was reconnaissance. He started observing Mark with a detached, clinical eye. He noticed Mark's patterns. The late-night emails sent from home that often had strange attachments. His frequent, almost ritualistic, trips to the supply closet. His over-the-top expense reports for client dinners that seemed to occur with unusual frequency. Alex began building a mental profile, cross-referencing these observations with company data. He recalled snippets of office gossip, previously dismissed as idle chatter, now seen through a new, suspicious lens. Mark's quick promotions, his ability to charm his way out of minor errors, his inflated project success rates. Alex began digging, quietly, discreetly. He accessed archived project files, ostensibly for historical data analysis. He cross-referenced Mark's reported client hours with actual client interaction logs. He examined expense reports, not just Mark's, but those of his team members, looking for discrepancies. He noticed a pattern. Mark's expenses were consistently higher than average, often rounding up or including dubious, miscellaneous charges. It wasn't enough to get him fired, not yet, but it was a crack in the facade. Then, he stumbled upon something more significant. While analyzing the raw data for a major campaign Mark had recently led for a client, Apex Innovations, Alex noticed a peculiar anomaly. The final client report, which Mark had presented with great fanfare, showed an impressive increase in market share that seemed almost too good to be true. When Alex drilled down into the underlying raw survey data, using the advanced statistical analysis software, he was so adept with programs like SPSS and SAS, which few others at Lighthouse truly understood beyond basic functions, he found inconsistencies. The numbers Mark had presented were not directly supported by the raw data. They had been manipulated, slightly but significantly, to paint a more favorable picture. It wasn't outright fraud, but it was a gross misrepresentation, bordering on falsification. Mark wasn't just taking credit for others' work, he was actively inflating his own performance. This was Alex's weapon. He understood the intricate algorithms Mark had purportedly used, algorithms Alex himself had helped design. He knew how Mark had tweaked the parameters, how he had cherry-picked data points, how he had selectively applied statistical models to achieve a desired outcome rather than an accurate one. It was subtle, undetectable to anyone, but a truly skilled analyst scrutinizing the rawest of data. He spent weeks, late into the nights, meticulously reconstructing the original, unmanipulated datasets, comparing them to Mark's reports, creating an irrefutable trail of evidence. He worked from his personal laptop, using secure, encrypted files. He didn't want anyone to discover his work. He even started coming into the office on weekends under the guise of getting ahead, where he could use the more powerful corporate servers without drawing suspicion, quickly deleting his access logs. His plan began to solidify. He wouldn't directly expose Mark. That would make him look petty, vengeful, and potentially compromise his own position. Instead, he would create the conditions for Mark to expose himself, to fall under the weight of his own arrogance and incompetence, using the very data Alex had so skillfully prepared. The perfect opportunity arrived with the Vertex Innovations pitch. This was a massive account, a game-changer for Lighthouse marketing. Mark, as usual, had elbowed his way to be the lead presenter, largely thanks to his charisma and his superficial understanding of the preliminary data Alex had provided. Alex had been tasked with providing the detailed analytical models and projections that would form the core of Mark's presentation. This was his chance. Alex prepared 2 sets of data models. One was perfectly accurate, reflecting the true, albeit less spectacular, projections for Vertex Innovations. The other, the Trojan horse, was subtly flawed. It contained errors that, when analyzed by a truly competent professional, would immediately raise red flags. These errors were not obvious. They were hidden within complex algorithms, subtle miscalculations in compound growth rates, and slight misinterpretations of market segmentation data. Mark, with his superficial understanding and reliance on Alex's output, would never spot them. Alex then implemented the trap. During a late-night data transfer to Mark's shared drive, under the guise of an urgent update, he swapped the accurate models with the flawed ones. He made sure the file names were identical, the timestamps recent. It was a digital sleight of hand, undetectable in the flurry of last-minute preparations. He also subtly highlighted a specific, complex data point within the flawed models, knowing Mark would latch onto it as a brilliant insight to emphasize during the pitch, unknowingly setting himself up for disaster. The day of the Vertex Innovations pitch dawned cold and gray, but the tension inside Lighthouse Marketing's conference room was palpable. The Vertex team, led by their sharp-as-nails CEO, Miss Evelyn Reed, a woman known for her incisive questions and no-nonsense approach, sat across the polished mahogany table. Miss Reed had a reputation for scrutinizing every number, every projection. This was Alex's insurance policy. Mark began his presentation, all confidence and swagger. He spoke of synergy, market disruption, and exponential growth, his voice resonating with practiced conviction. He navigated the slides, showcasing the complex data models Alex had supposedly provided. As he reached the critical projection slides, he leaned in, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. "And here," he declared, pointing to the specific, subtly flawed data point Alex had highlighted, "is where we see the true potential. An unprecedented growth rate in Q3, driven by this unique demographic shift we've identified." Alex, sitting quietly at the back of the room, watched Miss Reed, her brow furrowed. She scribbled something on her notepad. Her gaze sharpened, fixed on the screen. "Mr. Jensen," Miss Reed interrupted, her voice calm but penetrating. "Could you elaborate on that particular Q3 projection? The growth rate seems optimistic, given the broader market trends we've been observing. Could you show us the underlying raw data that supports that exponential jump?" Mark, momentarily flustered but quickly recovering, launched into a verbose explanation, relying on his usual charming platitudes. "It's all in the proprietary algorithm, Miss Reed," he chuckled. "A new model Alex here helped me perfect." He shot a quick, self-satisfied glance at Alex, completely unaware that he was sealing his own fate. Miss Reed, however, was not easily swayed by charm. "I appreciate the proprietary nature, Mr. Jensen, but the numbers, mathematically, seem to diverge from a realistic trajectory based on the initial input data you presented earlier. Could you walk us through the derivation, perhaps?" Mark stammered. He tried to backtrack to pivot, but Miss Reed was relentless. "I'm a numbers person, Mr. Jensen. I need to see the logic. The raw data to output, step by step." Finally, a senior analyst from Vertex, a quiet man with thick glasses, spoke up. "Excuse me, Mr. Jensen, but on slide 17, the formula for your projected customer acquisition cost, there appears to be a variable incorrectly weighted. It's a small error, but it cascades significantly through the projection." He pointed to a subtle miscalculation that Alex had intentionally introduced. The air in the room grew heavy. Mark's confident smile faltered, replaced by a strained rictus. He shuffled through his notes, his face reddening. He tried to blame the software, the data input, anything but himself. But the evidence was staring him in the face, a public unraveling of his supposed brilliance. "Miss." Reed closed her notepad with a decisive snap. "Mr. Jensen, I'm afraid this is not the level of meticulousness we expect from our partners. These projections are simply not credible. We operate on facts, not wishful thinking." The meeting ended abruptly, the Vertex team excusing themselves with polite but firm finality. The silence that followed their departure was deafening. Mark stood frozen at the front of the room, a deer in headlights. The senior partners at Lighthouse Marketing, their faces grim, turned their gazes from the empty screen to Mark, then, surprisingly, to Alex. "Alex," Mr. Henderson, the firm's managing partner, a man rarely seen without a stoic expression, addressed him. "You were instrumental in preparing the data for this. Did you notice any discrepancies?" Alex, maintaining his calm, almost innocent demeanor, spoke softly but clearly. "I double-checked everything on my end, Mr. Henderson. The initial raw data and models I provided were sound. I was only made aware of the final presentation files this morning when Mark shared them. I noticed some slight deviations from my original projections on a quick glance, but I assumed Mark had made justified adjustments for his presentation." It was a subtle, yet damning, implication that shifted the blame entirely to Mark's final alterations. He hadn't accused, only observed, and truthfully, he had only seen the final presentation files that morning. The fallout was swift and brutal. The loss of Vertex Innovations, a potentially multi-million-dollar client, sent shockwaves through Lighthouse Marketing. An internal investigation was launched, focusing on the deviations Alex had mentioned. Alex, now seen as a diligent and honest analyst, was asked to assist. He discovered the subtle manipulations Mark had made, demonstrating how easy it was for a less scrupulous individual to tweak the data for personal gain. He presented his original, accurate models, proving his own work was beyond reproach. He even subtly unearthed some of Mark's past questionable expense reports and the mild data inflations from previous projects, framing them as a pattern of behavior rather than isolated incidents. Mark was cornered. His charm, his bluster, his ability to talk his way out of trouble all failed him. He was summarily fired, his reputation in the industry shattered. The whispers around the office were of his incompetence, his dishonesty, his arrogance. The joke he had played on Alex was long forgotten, overshadowed by his spectacular downfall. Alex, meanwhile, found his quiet competence finally recognized. He was hailed as the one who had uncovered the truth, the unsung hero who had prevented greater damage. His methodical nature, once seen as quirky, was now lauded as a valuable asset. He received a significant promotion, a substantial raise, and was entrusted with the firm's most critical analytical projects. His mother's medical bills were no longer a crushing weight but a manageable concern. He never spoke to Mark again. He never gloated. He simply continued his work, quietly, meticulously, the way he always had. But now there was a subtle shift in the office dynamics. People respected him, they trusted him, and no one, absolutely no one, ever dared to mistake his quiet nature for weakness again. The bitter taste of humiliation had been replaced by the cold satisfaction of justice, served precisely and without fanfare. Mark Jensen, the arrogant Sagittarius, had learned the hard way that a silent man's quiet revenge could be far more devastating than any loud, public outburst. He thought he had made Alex a joke. Instead, he had made himself a forgotten cautionary tale. Alex had gone further than he could ever have imagined, and it had been worth every single calculated step. He had paid for his mother's care, secured his future, and taught a valuable lesson, all while appearing to do nothing more than his job. The true irony was that Mark, in his boundless arrogance, had created the very weapon that dismantled him. And Alex, the quiet analyst, had simply aimed it,